Hello everybody, Calamity here, and this video is about the free 5-star character we will all be getting starting in the new update on Tuesday, the Lunar 1 / the anniversary update. This will be available for all characters. I believe the requirement is you have to just be like AR 15 or AR 20 or something like that, just to prevent people from making a bunch of new accounts. And this video is for those that are new, those that are returning to Genshin after a long hiatus, or just veterans that might have forgotten what these standard characters do and you're wondering, which one should I pick, which one's constellations are good, stuff like that. And before we delve into any of that, let's just go ahead and say the boring answer first is pick the character that you enjoy the most. All right, like if you don't care about meta, you don't care about endgame, you're just here to play casually and explore the world, then by all means just pick a character you thought looked cool, was great in the story, etc, and just have a good time. This is just to help those that want a little bit more of a detailed explanation on what each character does before you make your final choice. That being said, let's begin with our first standard character, Dehya. So unfortunately, Dehya is a very underwhelming character. She was very hyped when she was first announced and introduced in the story. Unfortunately, the devs just dropped the ball by the time she was released. And you might be wondering, well, why is that? And that's because they tried to do something different with her kit and character design, or gameplay design. Dehya is basically supposed to be a tank. I'll have this talent up on the screen. Feel free to pause the video and read it while I yap. Or just, if you want to take the time to read it, go ahead. But I'm not going to be getting into too much detail into every character, otherwise we're going to be here forever. So she is effectively your tank without having to be on the field. The problem with that is that Genshin has so many healers and shielders that can do this job for you and make your character tanky without, wasting a character slot. Because unlike supports, Dehya does not provide any sort of buffs or debuffs to enemies and allies respectively at all. She just takes damage and that's kind of it. You can build her as a DPS, sort of, but her scalings and her multipliers are just so low that she pales in comparison to a lot of other pyro DPS. Even some 4-stars can easily dish out way more damage than Dehya can at the same level of investment, and that's really, really sad. The other way you can build her is for a Burgeon team, for those that remember what those were. But the problem with that is that it's not very unique. Any pyro character can be built as a Burgeon team if you want to. You just stack a bunch of elemental mastery and call it a day. You can do this with Thoma, who's a 4-star character and way more accessible than Dehya. Basically, I would not recommend Dehya for new players out there. I would only recommend her maybe you don't have her yet, you haven't lost the 50-50 to her yet, and you just want to collect all the characters, then sure. Or if you need more pyro characters for Imaginarium Theater, sure, but she's very, very low priority and I do not recommend her at all. Next up is Diluc, who is a pyro DPS character. That's right, another pyro character. And he does much more damage than Dehya, fortunately. So he's pretty good, pretty standard. The problem with Diluc is, well, he's just a launch character. He's been in the game for 5 years now, so in that time, yes, he has been power crept by, well, lots of other characters. I mean, Hu Tao is here. Yoimiya, you can argue, is better because of her range and simplicity. Arlecchino exists, and of course, Malvika can just press literally one button and blow up the entire screen, doing 1,000,000 damage. So yes, he's being power crept. Does that make him completely useless and not playable? No. He's just more involved than other characters are. He has a optimal combo that you want to be doing. Right, like I just said, Malvika doesn't have to do any combos. It's just press button and win game. So if you like characters that are a little bit more involved and have a proper rotation and proper setup, you might be interested in playing Diluc. He can be satisfying once you understand how his combo works and all that good stuff. I do think he's still very strong early game and mid game. He will fall off towards the end game, and that's not really his fault. It's more of the way Hoyoverse designs the endgame in this game. Because basically every endgame is a time test. They want you to defeat a bunch of waves of enemies and bosses in such a short amount of time, and unfortunately for Diluc, he needs that time to just set up and actually do the combo. So he ends up falling behind a lot of the other Pyro DPS. Now with Constellation, sure, he can become very competitive and do a lot of damage as well, but it's a heavy investment for new players to ask. And like I said, you could just pull a Malvika in the future and press button, win game, or you know, who even knows what Pyro characters will come out in Nodcry? There could be an even stronger character coming out. You know, who knows? Only the future will tell us in the future updates. Now, do I recommend it for new players? Sure. I would recommend him if you don't have other 4-star or 5-star Pyro DPS characters, and you feel like the lack of a Pyro DPS character is making the game not as fun for you because maybe you're dealing with, you know, cryo shields or something like that that's making the game difficult, and you're like, man, if I just had some pyro damage, this would be way easier. Then sure, I can suggest a Diluc for you if you don't have anyone else, because we don't know when other pyro characters will be making a return on the banners. But if you are a new character and you pulled a 4-star character called Gaming, I would recommend you invest in him instead of Diluc, because even though he is a 4-star, you can get constellations of him, and when he's at his maxed out C6 constellation, Gaming can actually do more consistent damage than a Diluc. As sad as it is to say that, it is true. Gaming is a very underrated, very strong DPS character. Next up is Jean, who is arguably the best healer on the standard banner roster. Jean is an Anemo healer, but she can also provide a lot of utility to her team in the form of buffs and debuffs. And some of you might have watched a couple YouTube shorts or TikToks out there where Jeans can sort of do this sort of gimmick where they are able to pull some, not all, but some certain bosses in the game and yeet them, basically. And because of the scaling, they'll take fall damage, like they'll take way more increased fall damage by doing this. That's a very niche thing that Jean can do. Do not expect that to be a constant Jean thing that she does all the time. It's very rare. Only a few bosses will be susceptible to this, and it's not going to be helpful in the end game, unfortunately, as funny as it is. Now, with that being said, she does provide debuffs, like I said earlier, in the form of her artifact set, but every Anemo character in the game, or most Anemo characters in the game, I should say, basically use this set. It's one that shreds elemental resistances by 40% when they swirl. So Anemo can swirl with Pyro, Cryo, Electro, and Hydro. So keep that in mind. She's great in a lot of teams as she'll fill in the healer slot. Unfortunately, those buffs are hidden. Well, not hidden, but they're locked behind Constellation. So for example, we can see the C2 gives movement speed and attack speed buff by 15%, which is actually quite nice. Attack speed is just something that not a lot of characters give as a buff. Like only Mika and like a C6 Yunjin, for example, do this, but again, it's very rare. So this is still something to consider. And back in the day, before a character called Faruzan existed, this used to be the only way we could shred Anemo resistance. But it's still pretty good, obviously. You know, 40% resistance is good to have, but we already have a character that does this and does this consistently. And her name is Faruzan, like I mentioned before. So if you have her built, or you end up pulling for her in the future, you don't really need this constellation. So it used to be really good, but not so much anymore. And her C6, unfortunately for Jean, just isn't that great. Enemies get a 35% damage reduction if they're inside your burst. But the thing is, Jean's burst heals so good that, you know, I feel like this is so unnecessary. So it's not good, unfortunately. But C2, C4, something to consider when you're building your teams. But that being said, she doesn't have to be. She's not restrictive to her teammates. You can build her. You can put her with a lot of other different teammates. You know, anybody could use a healer. Anybody that could use the swirl debuff with the Veridescent Veneer is going to be a solid choice. Solid heals overall. She's going to be great early game at keeping you alive, and so you don't have to stop and cook all the time. She'll be great in the mid game. End game, she kind of falls off a little bit. She can be used with certain teams, but there's definitely uh, better healers and better supports out there. For example, you might have heard how popular Bennett is, and he still is in the game because of his enormous attack buff that he can provide, while still being just a 4-star character. Next up is Keqing, and just like Diluc, she is a main DPS, but for Electro. And also like Diluc, she's unfortunately been power crept. She is a launch character, right? So she's been in the game for a long time. However, we've had many Electro DPS characters be introduced into the game. Raiden Shogun, Clorind, Varessa, for example. There's tons. And of course, we just got the new Enefa with Lunar Charged. And now we're also going to be getting another new Electro character, Flins, who also does Lunar Charge. That doesn't mean Keqing is completely useless. Remember, Imaginary Theater is an endgame mode that exists, and you need to bring a lot of characters for it. So she still has a usage there for endgame. But you can still use her throughout your early game, your mid game, and she'll do just fine. And she does plenty of damage. Her constellations are really good as well. She just gets more and more damage. I would say like even like a C3 or C4 Keqing can compete with Raiden Shogun. Maybe a C6 Keqing could possibly compete with a Varessa C0, but Varessa is just such a hard-hitting character and easier to play, in my opinion. But Keqing also has some good variety when it comes to teams. You can put her in an Aggravate team. That means you put her with a bunch of Dendro-related characters, and you proc that reaction so she can do more damage. You can put her... I mean, you can even do the Lunar Charge stuff with her. You just have to have Enefa in the team. And not Flins, probably. You can also do Overloaded if you have Chevreuse. She does have combos similar to Diluc, but they're not that complicated. I'm sure you can find a video guide out there that showcases them all. Next up is Mona, and Mona's kind of an interesting character. She's not a main Hydro DPS, she's a sub DPS or a burst DPS, as a lot of people like to call them in this game. She does primarily her damage with her burst. It does a lot of damage, and it also applies what's called an Omen debuff. Literally in the skill description. Again, pause the video if you want to take a look-sees and read what it does. I'll put it right here. You can read all of that if you want. But basically, Mona does her burst. Enemies, lesser enemies get trapped in a bubble, but this will not work. Larger enemies and bosses will not be trapped in a bubble, unfortunately. But they will still get the Omen debuff. And she can increase the damage taken. If we take a look at skill attributes here, you can level it up. So right now, when they're affected by the Omen debuff, it's 56% increased damage. At level 9, it will be 58. It will be 60 at level 10, if you want to invest that much into your Mona. Constellations, I think it's actually neat to note here that Mona got updated. Her constellation, her C1 got updated for the new Lunar Charged reaction. It will also affect, so if you invested in Enefa or plan to use Flins in the upcoming update, Mona could be a character you can consider using with them at C1 to help improve the reaction even further, because that reaction is already strong. So giving it another 15% boost, not to mention the big up to 60% damage taken increase from her Omen. That's an overall 75% damage increase to your team with Mona on it. So that's something definitely to consider. And she also has a lot of build variety and a lot of weapon variety. So you could give her a free-to-play weapon that you'll get early on called Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers. What this does is the next character you swap to will get a huge attack bonus. At Refinement 5, it's a 48% attack boost. This is nothing to scoff at. This is huge. So you would switch to Mona, then switch to your main DPS, and they get this huge attack buff for 10 seconds. That's insane. A lot of people put this on Mona because she is that buffer / debuffer on your team. So it's something to consider. Or you could even give her a prototype Amber. This is something you can freely craft way early in the game. And this will now turn Mona into a buffer at C1. As well as now a healer and like a battery for your team, because this weapon provides energy and healing when you use her burst, which should be all the time. You want to invest a lot of energy recharge into Mona to make sure her Omen is able to be used at all times. So very strong character overall, good variety, lots of teams to consider. So if you're someone that likes to experiment with a lot of teams, Mona is definitely a character that I would highly suggest for new players out there, and she is very good from early game to mid game. End game, she does have a lot of competition, which is why you don't see her as much. The only build I don't recommend for new players is a main DPS. She's not really good as a main DPS. She does need some constellations to even consider being one, and even then, there are way better characters at this role than Mona. She's better off as your off-field, burst, DPS, and buffer/debuffer. Next up is Qiqi, and I'm gonna go ahead and apologize ahead of time to all of the 5 Qiqi mains out there that still use this character. But Qiqi, unfortunately, is still the worst character on the standard banner, right next to Dehya. Unfortunately, I do not recommend her for new players, and that's simply because all Qiqi does is heal. She heals really good when it's available, but that's all she does. Every character in the game has some sort of extra utility along with their heal. Like, you can heal and provide buffs. You can heal and do debuffs. You can heal and do something else, basically. Like what we talked about with Jean. Jean has the Veridescent Veneer as a debuff, and then you have the Constellations giving a bunch of different buffs to her team as well, or debuffs. Qiqi has none of that. And unfortunately, even her heal, which is tied to her skill, has a long cooldown of 30 seconds. Her burst also heals, but it's a one-time thing, so it's just bad uptime on her heals. But when they are active, sure, they're great. And her constellations, unfortunately, they don't add too much. Actually, they don't add much to her team in terms of buffs, debuffs, or anything. Like this one, C4 gives a minus 20% to enemies affected by her skill, which is that's okay, but that's not really good. We would prefer her to give 20% attack increase to her team or something like that. It's just not good at all, unfortunately. Not much else to say. Again, sorry to Qiqi mains. I am recommending new players skip. She will make your life easier if you do have her for early game, even mid game, but she's gonna fall off hard once you get to the end game because she's not providing you buffs or debuffs to help give you that extra bit of damage you're gonna need for the end game bosses and such. Next up is Tighnari, who's a very solid Dendro DPS. Unfortunately, his weapon, his signature weapon, just like Dehya, is not available in the standard banner. In fact, it's not available at all. It's very rare that it'll be ever available to you, but that's not a bad thing because fortunately for free-to-play players out there, one of his best weapons is actually a 3-star bow. That's right. A 3-star. I actually used Tighnari in endgame situations, and I just used him in the latest Imaginary Theater, and he still does good. He has a really good performance. So definitely consider this character if you enjoy his playstyle. He has a very simple playstyle compared to, say, Diluc or Keqing. And his constellations just make him do more damage, basically. Overall, solid character, but he doesn't have much team variety, I guess would be one of his downsides. You just want to do a spread team, which means his teammates are going to consist of Electro and Dendro characters, and that's kind of it. Like, you wouldn't pair him up with Animo, Cryo, Geo, Pyro, for example. There's just going to be no synergy there, and you don't want your reactions being messed up by other elements. So, simple to use DPS, strong damage, but very limited team variety. I would recommend him for newer players if you vibe with his playstyle. Otherwise, you have 2 other solid options, as I've already mentioned, like Diluc or Keqing if he's not your thing. So last but certainly not least is Yumemizuki, who is the newest character to be added to the standard banner. She was just added earlier this year. And she is an animal healer as well as a driver, so to speak. The devs designed Mizuki to be a very easy to play character who's meant for casuals and very little button pressing. So if you're someone that doesn't like this whole rotation stuff and combos and stuff, you just want an easy to play character, highly recommend, or at least consider recommending Mizuki. Because the way you want to play Mizuki is you want to pair her up with a bunch of off-field damage dealers, like Zhonling, for example, Kea. You can consider Fischl, Yaimiko, Raiden Shogun, Farina, for example. And then just have her float around, because her skill makes her float around, and basically, you know how like Sucrose or Kazuha, they throw out their burst and then you swap off of them, because the burst does all of the damage and it pulls in all the enemies and all that stuff, and you don't have to worry about it. Mizuki is the pull. That's why she's the driver this time. And so instead of throwing out a thing and swapping off the character, it's no, you do the damage first, bring out Mizuki, who's gonna like be basically like this tornado of off-field damage and death, and you just it's great for clearing out waves of enemies. If you're on PC, maybe you have a second monitor and you just want to like watch a stream or a YouTube video or something while you're farming some materials or whatever. Mizuki, great character for that. Unfortunately, just like Tighnari and Dehya, her signature weapon isn't available on the standard banner, but thankfully she doesn't need it. She is the character that I personally will be using my invite for, just because I don't have her yet. But is she super meta, super strong, super broken? No, not at all. She's just good for, I would say, early game, mid game, a little bit of late game, depending on what teammates you pair her up with. You could definitely consider bringing her for the Imagineering Theater to get rid of, or to use her on some of those easier chambers or acts, I should say. But yeah, good character overall, but she's definitely not the meta. And with that being said, that is going to be it for all of the standard characters that you can choose from during the anniversary update or the Lunar 1 update. If you have any questions about characters, not sure who you should pull for, constellations and all that, feel free to ask in the comments down below. I'll do my best to try to answer you, or maybe someone that has more experience with the character will answer you, because I don't know everything about this game, so maybe someone else can help you if I can't, hopefully. But with that being said, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff if this was helpful for you. I will be back to do another video. This time, we're going to talk about the constellations you can give to the limited pool of characters that we're going to get in the next update. That one's going to be even longer. There's so much to discuss. See you guys then. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.